Perfect. Right, so this week what we were doing is we continue to work on rebuilding a React app with XElement in Astro. And if you're not familiar with it, we're working on Sarah's little sBird app, right? And this is just basically goes about gathers bird information from different locations around the place. And what we're doing is really we've been working on this second part here where we're trying to discover the individual's country code and subsequently their entire region's code. And as you can see here, we have this sort of a nesting list, and we just go down and we have a sub list. And what we're doing is we're currently building up the country code, and the this is as far as we kind of got last week was this top level here. This week, what we're looking to do is to actually build and continue this out, so that way we have the full interaction suite going. And it's like as we select it, we get different ones. So if we go to Northern Ireland, we go to Derry, or we go to Omagh, or we go to County Antrim, or we go to Wales and we go to Caerphilly, or we go to Carmarthenshire. Don't get just honestly, this is one of your favourite games. Get to speak Welsh towns, Merthyr Tindall and Gwynedd and all the rest of it. So yeah, this is what we're working on. And as far as we got last week was here, right? Where we've managed to, as I said, get to the top level, where as we enter this country code, we get the small country, we get the name of the top level of the countries. So if we were to put in, for instance, CA for Canada, we'll get all the regions within Canada, right? And do need to put out the disclaimer about Gitpod. It's actually taking less time to refresh now, right? Whereas normally it does refresh itself every now and then. But yeah, this is what we're working on, and this is where we're going to go with it. Now, I do hope you've been keeping up to date with the code. It is available for you to check out in the GitHub repositories. The code itself is pretty tight so far. This project is moving pretty well, I would say. And what we're doing, as I said, just working our way through here. So last week with this, we got we got as far as declaring our regions and our list, right? Which is this component here. Now, this is the component where we were basically gathering, where we were generating the actual list items. And now we're wanting to take this one step deeper and just basically do the exact same for the next list and then any other list and just keep adding to it. So currently the setup was that when they came onto this little regions, it was itself a form, and there they entered in their country, it's like their first two letters of their country code, right? And we stored this onto a placeholder within the store, which is this inferior property that lasts on the page within any X element. So any X element, this is one, and then this is one, can have access to the exact same store and be able to pull these variables and set variables in around the place as often as they want, with very little constraint. It is really flexible and easy. And all we really did was something quite unique. We saved the actual data set that was coming through within the actual HTML attribute located on this locations list, which is, as you can see, we're grabbing this from the document, right? Which is another part in the document calls this XR locations, and those XR locations is this particular div element here, right? Now, this div element basically is what we are going to be using to fill in the information and then populate the list underneath. Now, this was a very good practice because what we discovered with XElement was that we can actually listen to changes on the DOM, mutations on the DOM, and as these mutations happen, we can then fire off effects or actions. And in this case, if the mutation was that we were saving or serializing the information directly onto a data set, right, within, sorry, the HTML attribute, right, data.data, basically, and on this particular div class here, right, so when we go into our developer tools and we inspect the console, we should see something quite weird going on, right? So we're coming into here, and as you can see, we've got the form, we've got our input, just like you've seen within the X form here. We've got our form, we've got our text input, and we've got our button, right? And to those who have just joined, welcome. What we're doing is basically just continuing breaking a React app into XElement. Now, when I do GB, for instance, because, you know, Great Britain, ooh, you might have seen that, right? Down in this here, we've got the div, which basically provides this following region here. Now, all we did was that we serialized the entire data within the HTML. So you can see this JSON object that's located. This allows us to then tap into to a couple of things. This allows us to tap into the @observe method that comes with XElement, and that is just a DOM mutation observer, which is native to every single browser. And it's a great way of doing actions, basically, reacting to things on the DOM, right? And that is what we're going to be working on more and bringing in more into XElement. Pretty much, I would recommend watching the previous video if you want to just follow a lot of the code that's came before. But what we're doing is just continuing. For the sake of progressing with this project, we're just going to be going full steam ahead with this.
So can
What
I
we're now
can I
working
just
with,
give a quick, can I sort of gut check my
of
understanding of
course,
what's going on here?
please, Sarah.
Okay, so what we're doing when we click the button, we're making an API fetch call. And in the
Hmm.
case when you enter the region code GB for Great Britain, we are making an API fetch call, and then the response object that we're getting returned, essentially that response is being attached right to our div as
Hmm.
attributes to it, as an attribute to it, as one big
Yes.
object. And so
Yes.
instead of what I would have been doing in React, which is a pretty straightforward process of, okay, I'm going to do a line item for each of, I'm going to map through my array,
Hmm.
and get information from the API fetch this way. What we're doing in this case is taking the response object from the API fetch, attaching it to that div, capital B div. It's
Hmm.
an X element, not just a regular HTML element.
That's
And,
correct.
and then that's where that information lives for us to then generate those list of buttons underneath.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then what happens is that when that list gets generated onto this div, right? Because realistically speaking, and there's this div here, right? It's got nothing in it, right? It's got, there's a lot of these things that are just sitting there waiting to be populated. Like you can see, we've got empty elements here,
Yeah,
right?
we've got nothing but my inline styles going on right now.
We're not regretting the inline styles at all. So, like you can see, it's like all we've done is just basically created a placeholder on the document, right? That is really filled with nothing but a lot of DOM elements being created for us statically, right? So we don't need JavaScript to create these for us. It's there, we can just take hold of them, right? And as you can see with this div element here, right, this class, right, sorry, this gets added with a HTML attribute. And that is the attribute that we were just talking about there, Sarah. Where, like you were saying, that is what we were serializing, sorry. Here, just down in this line here on line 36, right? Where we're basically just taking the data set, right? Grabbing the location using just a DOM query selector because it's outside of this particular div, right? Or sorry, it's outside of this button, right? Is not an attached children. It doesn't have any children to it. Sorry, the only child to this is the text that's in it, right? So we have to go up to the document to grab this next element, and that's what we're doing here. So we go document.query selector, grab this, and a personal convention of mine is using a form of BEM, the block element modifier nomenclature that we have in CSS, and bringing that into JavaScript, where I normally just apply the JS prefix to the class title. This way, I'm not using these class names in my actual CSS scope. They're not having any style declarations applied to them. All I'm doing is just using that as a place, as a way to grab, the CSS selector, if you
Right.
get what I mean,
Yeah.
in JavaScript. It's a good wee trick. And it keeps your code clean as well. Because this here, just to show you next, right, is our next our next X element component that we've created. And that is it here. So we've got our styles, and we've got also our JavaScript tag that we could grab it by, right? And then in the next line is where the magic is happening. You know what I mean? It's like you're saying, we're making this fetch request. Sorry, the chair is really squeaky. We're making this fetch request, and fetch is native with XElement, so you can make fetch requests. You could also do dynamic imports as well, but that's outside the scope of this project. But yeah, and as it is an await process, as it is a promise, we could use the async await syntax and get our data simply by hitting this API request up the top here, blah, blah, blah. There we go. And then we're just stringifying the data into two different places. We're stringifying it into the HTML attribute, and we're also stringifying it into the actual store country.data. And we're just applying store.country.data to it. So that way, the intention was that we were going to use that later on. And indeed, we are, right?
And
Especially
then
in this next part. Mm-hmm.
And then, so let's look at the observe method then. So once we make
Perfect.
the call and
Mm-hmm.
we get the data and we've sort of attached it to that div now,
Yep.
let's just quickly look at how our H3 and P and ULs are populated with that data.
Perfect. We would right. That's this block here, right? Quite concise. It's pretty much just the JavaScript that you would need to do such a trick like this, right? Um, all we're really doing is tackling this. Um, so let me first of all talk about the observe method itself, right? Um, the observe method is, like I said, is one of three observer APIs that is native to, sorry, there's four observer native APIs to every browser, Sarah. That is the resize observer, the intersection observer, which everybody is familiar with, for your infinite scrolling, etc. And then you also have two lesser known ones. You have the DOM mutation observer, which basically picks up on any changes that happens to, for instance, an element or on the document. Um, and then once that happens, it then fires off an async function. So it handles it like a promise kind of thing. So if there was any change, now this is a move from the old event listener of change. There was a mutation event listener that had a lot of problems. It created a lot of infinite loops. And what this does is basically prevents that on the browser and just fires when it happens, kind of thing. It is extremely safe and extremely performant. And like I said, we're just utilizing a lot of the native browser behaviors. And so it's completely web performant. And that's what the observe method does in effect. What we have is what we were doing here was what we were explaining the last time in the last video was that XElement gives you the ability to customize and have more granular control over your observations, over your actions, and especially over your event handlers as well. And this is all just to drive that extra level of control for the developer. What we're doing here is that so every parameter that gets passed in to XElement, so whenever you write an at method followed by the equals and then the curlies, you are now in JavaScript land or TypeScript land, might I say. You can also use TypeScript in here, right? XElement picks that up. Doesn't do any type checking, but just does what ESBuild does in retrospect to its type check function, and does that for you, right? And so what we have here is basically a callback function, and we're accepting three parameters. The first one is the actual entry, which is the DOM mutation interface. So the first entry is always the interface for that particular event or observer. The next one is our store. This thing here is the power that powers everything. And the next one is that we're passing in the options. I called it O just to iterate a point in the last video that you could really call these parameters anything. For continuity and keeping in line with our documentation and just to get the information out there, we're just having some lexical conventions like entry, store, and options, but you could really call them anything, right? XElement is polymorphic and it is easy, easy, right? Um, and so all we're doing is now we're just like I'm saying, like you asked me, Sarah, right? It's to explain what's happening inside this
Yep.
observation. And within the observation, right, we're first of all, there was a couple of things, right? So let me just bring over the old page. Sorry, the old page, the live page, right? What we're seeing here is this wee text where the currently set to GB hyphen SCT for Scotland. And if we change this, that changes over to WS. So far, we only really got this bit. We're going to be working on the next bit later on, right? And but yeah, so it's like what we got is effectively a literal, right? Where we're just basically creating items that are going to be appended to this ordered list. You know, the emptied ordered list that we've seen on here, right? So this emptied ordered list is what we're going to be plugging the literal into, right? Like you said, like you see, fill this using the text content, right? And that's exactly what we're doing here. Um, yeah. So the inner HTML for the list is just getting the data, and that is pretty much this here, where we're just parsing the data set, that JSON object that we passed into the HTML attribute. We're just getting that, we're just parsing that, and then because this passes out an array, we can map directly over it. And as we have our little template literal here as a callback function, we're just passing the data into it, and then we can just extrapolate the data into this little list item here, and then append that directly. We can then also change the text content, right, to equal the country code that has been set. Okay? It feels like a wee bit of magic. It is really, it's a bit of yeah, magician's sleight of hand going on here, right? Whenever one enters, so basically this doesn't fire, nothing like this happens, right? As you can see, unless, whoa, what do we do? Right? Unless we actually go to here and do something. So like you're saying, there's no mutation observer going on, right? Even as if we entered this in this form. It's only when we send action do we make the fetch request, get the data, serialize the data, and then create all the inner regions, right? And that is what's going on there. And we're just basically going to be following a similar method and breaking this down. So as one region gets listed, when they click on the next button, there should be a little event handler, right, that does something similar kind of thing. And it should be interesting because what we've got now is nested elements. First off, what I'm going to do is create the subregions, right? Technically speaking, this is just a reiteration of what we currently got. You know, it just rebuilds and rebuilds it outwards. But the thing that does change is the API request code, right? So when they click the button, right?
Yeah, so that button up there, that's our main sort of input button, right, on the
Mhm.
form. And so if I think of it, the way I built it in React was that list of data that comes back in the response object, mapping through that and creating individual buttons, which we have done. It's just those buttons don't have any functionality. So it's like we need not just to create a list of data, but a list of buttons that are all now querying this new API and querying it with whatever the button's text content data is. So if I were thinking of this in React, if I look at that literal there that takes the data, I would be, so we are now returning spans that each have a button. I'm thinking, yeah. So is it now that what we actually want our literal to return are individual list items with capital B buttons, with XElement buttons? Can we do
Now this
that?
is the thing. Technically speaking, no,
Okay.
because these elements are being created by the DOM. XElement is something that's created by Astro, because it's
Okay.
static. You get what I mean? It's like those elements are printed statically by Astro at build time. So it's like there's and this is this is honestly, Sarah, right? The last 3 weeks have given me the biggest trip going down the renderer route, right? Because this is the one use case, right, where I will come to was, yeah, I kind of like XElement on the client. I would like to have XElement on the client, and then that is the compromise that I'm not willing to sacrifice right now, because I would like it, but then again, I would prefer to have something like solid JSX on the client, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. So I think, yeah. So
Mm.
this is what I did and what we would do in
Mhm.
React is we would be having those buttons be
Right.
interactive.
So,
So what you're telling me is that
mhm.
those the literal can return HTML elements, but it can't return X elements.
Yes.
Okay.
Unfortunately, yes, because this is just a pure HTML template literal. Um,
Now, it can return buttons with on click functions, can it? And then can
it
our
can.
function be determined somewhere earlier up in the Astro front matter or somewhere within this div or something like that? Is that maybe how you approach it this way?
That is that was one way. Personally speaking, I don't like using the HTML on-click handlers, or the on
Okay.
handlers, simply and only because those are it's now moving towards the line of bad practice. If you
Okay.
get what I mean, it was moved in favor of the add event listeners, you know,
Okay. Okay.
and
Yep.
so but the thing is, it's like technically technically speaking, we can get away with this, right? Um, because what we'll do is just plug in the function into here, right? However, there is one way that we can do this, right? Um, UL, yes, right. So all we're going to do is just turn this into the UL, right, into an X element, right? Because I just want to try an idea. I
Okay.
want to place an observation on this list, right? And all I'm doing is observing for changes to the children. Sorry, I'm also typing down here. Right. Equals. Now we're in XElement, and now we're in JavaScript land, right? And that is it. This is all it takes to write a function. And in here, right, so all we're going to be doing, right, is giving me I just want to console log the entry at the present moment, right? Like I said, the first one is always the entry, the second one's always the score, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the third one's always the options, right? But we'll play with the options later, right? And here I am just going to go console log, my favorite thing. So here, right, and I'm just going to make sure that, yeah, we have no more console logs running. So this should really observe something when anything changes, ideally when children gets added to it, okay? And we
Okay.
should see a console log entry, right? Now, back to here, we refresh, right? And here, like we say, we're just going to go to the console and start seeing if it picks up anything, right? Oh, we got it did fire. because we have no console logs running apart from the one that we just entered here, right, for
Mm-hmm.
today. And so what is really noticed is that the mutation record is a child's list, right? See that? Type child's list.
Yeah.
And what it's done, it's added nodes, and it's added these nodes in here. Right, it's got a wee text node, don't know what that is. Here's a little list, all right. And then, yeah, and then it just goes down, and that's what it's done. Now, what we can do is that I think we could apply event listeners via this method onto here, right? So we get our child's list, we go down here, add nodes, list items, happy days, they've got children, happy days, right? Okay, so within this observe method, right, we're just going to go and also this as well is also available to you, right? So if I was to console log this, just to demonstrate that this brings back the actual sorry, I just needed life to refresh here in Gitpod. And this brings back the actual UL with all the populated lists. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's what this would bring back, right? Is this and its children, right? So we can use that to target things in between and underneath it, right? Now all we're going to do is basically go console const, and we're going to get all the buttons, right? And there's a trick that you do. So when you do document.querySelector.all, sorry, query selector all. So if we go, in this case, is this dot query selector all, and here we're just basically going to be looking for the buttons, right? So we're just doing a simple grabbing by the div, the HTML tag, right?
Mm-hmm.
Normally, what this does is give us a DOM node list, which is not really iterable, right? You can't really iterate over the top yet. And all we're doing is just basically turning it into an array. So if you're ever using query selector all and you really need to use the items into it and map over it, just spread it. Life's so much easier. And all we're doing is just console logging this. What did you not come up? Why are you not coming up? Query selector all the buttons. This dot query selector all buttons. Button. Right, got you. Sorry, I
Oh,
got a wee bit carried away with myself there. There you go. Now you got all the buttons
yeah.
within here, right? Now we're one step closer, because what we can do is with these buttons, we can go all buttons dot for each. So we're just taking each button, right?
Mm-hmm.
Call it BTN, right? So we're taking each button, and all we're doing is applying an event listener over the top of each button, right? So we've got each button now, and we're just going dot add event listener, like you normally do. You know, just missing the XElement magic over the top of it, the add event listener, and then here we're doing a click, right? And then here we're just doing, we get in, do we need the event? No, we don't need the event details of the click, right? So we're just passing in a callback function, right? And it's an async function because we're going to be making a fetch request, okay? And in here, we're just basically going to be doing what we did before. Now, this is how we will apply the event listeners to all the buttons within that list. And, right, okay, so we're going to go back to our list. We got our fetch request, right? And, right,
Now
let's just.
that's the original fetch request, right? So
Mhm.
we're gonna want the sort of the next fetch
Public.
request. We're gonna want
We're
the next level one.
right. So this is regions list. Sorry, subdivision sub location here. Right. So we need this, and we could do that. Right. Copy that, and we're literally just going back into here, pasting this, quick formatting. I'll move you over as well, just to make life easy. Right, now what we're going to do, right, is that because each button also comes with its own code, right? If you remember, we've given a HTML attribute of a data code, right? So what we can do is we could go store.country.code and then add this data code to it, right? And it gives us our second line kind of thing.
Yep.
Right. Another thing that we can do, because we've got store, we could pass store into this, because store is now available in the top level of this function scope, right? We could pass it down into this for each and, you know, access the store, right? So we could go like, this would be, yeah. So store dot country sorry, I'm just using the iffy blocks just to say if it's there, if no, happy days kind of thing, right? And then for here, we're just going to go this. I know, be button btn dot dataset dot code, right? And just double checking, yes, data.code, happy days, and then we're just going to console log the data, right?
Yeah.
And we have another console log kicking about anywhere? No. Oh yes, we do. Down here. Right, you piss off. Right. Happy days. And we are back to here. Right, so we refresh. Hit GB. Submit country code. Oh, S event listener is not a function on an event. Okay. Okay, I think I got an idea. Right, this for each. And we go there we go. So we get the
Okay.
buttons,
Yeah.
right? Now, if I went button dot add event listener, clicked, and all we're doing is just console logging, click, unexpected, not, we're back, we're alive, right. There we go, Sarah.
Yep.
I
Perfect.
think I know what the problem was, and it was this. Right, that makes sense because when we were passing down the reference in the ES build, it didn't hold this in memory, so it really didn't know what was pointing to. That was just a problem. ES build didn't know what was being pointed to at that point,
Right.
and all we did was just basically put it into parentheses, so that way it's held in memory in the ES build line. Right, so now we got this, right, we can apply our event listeners like we originally intended,
Yep.
right? And there we go. Every life is good. Life is good. Good. Right. Now we want our actual function. That. We want this. And we're going to console log our data. So .log our data. Right. Now another problem that we're having is that this is an await. So we're going to turn this into an async. Right. And that will clean that up. And we come back to here. There we go. Sorry. No. Why? Save. Work. All right. Do you know what I'm doing wrong? Is this right? So if I go back to data, my console log goes wrong.
That's more like what I'm expecting. Good job.
We're getting there, buddy.
Yep.
Right. So we got our data, right? And all we're really doing again is just iterating over the top of it. Right. So when we click, we want that to then do something similar where we pass into, you know, so basically we pass into a secondary list, right?
Yes. Yep.
Down here, right? UL. And the great thing is because we've already declared this UL once, right, up here, right? We don't need to redeclare it twice.
Yeah.
This is, but they're two different components, two different XElement. We see that as individuals, right? So all I'm doing is actually I'm going to give this a particular ID because we're going to be, well, to be honest, JSX, JS, and we're going to call this subregions,
Sure.
right? Because then that way we could grab the subregions in here and then populate the list. You get what I mean?
Yep. So
Right.
using a similar method we did before, we'll just construct a different literal.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, in actual fact, right, we could just copy this literal, right? People are going to be looking at this, goes, there's deduplication of code. Well, take a look at the React app. Sorry, Sarah, but I'm not just saying that, but I'm saying in a typical React app, you have a fair bit of deduplication, regardless of where you stick it, how you write it, etc. It's inherent in the framework, right? And but what I'm doing is basically I'm just sticking it where it's necessary. You know what I mean? And in here, right? So we have the list. This basically applies the event listeners on all the children, right? And then in the appending list below it, right, which doesn't, it's not going to be filled until we make it do something. And I reckon we're just going to keep going with the @observed method because this wee jack in the box is pretty much serving us well at the present moment, right? And all we're going to do is just move this data onto this subregions as a HTML, as an attribute, right? So like we did in the previous one, we're just going to grab the actual element, right? So const sub list, subregions. And then here we're just going to go document, back out to the document again, right? Dot quick selector. JS subregions. We're just plonking a wee dot in it so it knows it's a class to create. Once we get that, right, and we're just basically going to go subregions. Yep, data.map over the subregions, and we're just going to bring in our literal, right?
Now, I don't want to interrupt you or your thinking, but the one thing that struck me as you were talking about the duplication in the code and putting the code only where it needs to be, when we were looking through the React app and trying to find the function that made the regions API call versus the function that made the subregions API call, I mean, we had this long list we were scrolling through. And if you scroll up to the very top here, we don't have a heck of a lot in our Astro front matter, do we?
No.
So
No, not at all.
instead
Actually,
of instead of my React app having a bunch of those functions way up at the top to try to scroll through to figure out, okay, well, which function was working with which item. Now, mind you, I also didn't have components, separated out or anything, but it is occurring to me now how these the functions that are being, the methods on these X elements that are being used to do the interactivity are just nestled right in with them, right in the HTML template.
Yes, yes, it is right next to it. I mean, I've always under the hood kind of stuff, but it's pretty. It can be explained in a sentence. You know, it's like XElement under the hood literally just takes everything that you've got. Sorry, let's just go back to the source, right? Because the source is not going to change for this page, right? At least it shouldn't refresh that often. But anyways, if you take a look at the HTML source code, right, with your square glasses, right, it is not. The HTML source code never looks pretty. You know, we're not meant to read this. This is for the browser, right? But like you can see here, we've got our form element, alright? But then we've also got our script tags sitting right next to it. We've got a button right next to that, and this is our actual XElement component. See that little top button that we made? That's it. It really just, encapsulates 4 lines if people are that, stressed about it. The only reason why this goes over a number of lines is because that's how HTML literals are placed, is like escaped, sorry. And so it's like this would normally be in line, right? But the vast majority of everything else is in line. And what you tend to find is that your actual X element is nothing more than a really long sentence, right? And then that's it. It just goes down and down and down and down. There you go. Nothing more. That's how your JavaScript gets serialized onto the DOM, and then that way we're not sending any JavaScript down, everything is just serialized as soon as it's printed statically, because Astro is a static site generator, we can leverage that. You get what I mean? Instead of like having to save it into actual JavaScript files, then having to request those JavaScript files for those JavaScript files to then come down the line for them to be read by the browser and then for them to be executed and hydrated onto the client. Whew. Dear God, let me just print them statically onto the freaking HTML if it means I save, a round trip around the block.
Because I think when I was starting to learn React,
Mm-hmm.
um, I sort of, whether correctly or not, but I got it in my
Mm-hmm.
head that the HTML templating part, the render part, should look as clean and as simple as possible. Like ideally, that's just
Mm-hmm.
component, 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 so that it's easy at a glance to look at what your functional component is returning, and that's how you know what's going on. But it seems like the opposite, is happening here, where I'm really seeing the elements with everything attached to them, and
Yes.
there's very little just sort of sitting at the top of my page by contrast.
It's that is partly because of the way of the rendering of the way XElement works. I mean, just to have a wee pause, right, and just to talk about this for a second, if you don't mind, Sarah, is that it's a vital point between the two worlds, between React and Astro and XElement. It is a paradigm shift in the conceptual application of how we go about writing and creating components. Whereas with React, I mean, to be honest, with React and Astro is different to React itself, right? React is is ideally is made for single page applications, and they have their own client side routers that allow you to do all of that fancy, cool stuff. But then that's how you build really over the top applications, where data is coming in, you re-render it, but all that lives on the client, right? And with Astro being a static site generator first and foremost, it meant that when you hit run build, or anytime you even hit save in development, you're effectively hitting a build command. So Astro would then turn around and write and build everything, put that into HTML for you under the hood. And when you hit npm run build in Astro, it spits them all out into HTML. And that is where me and Jonathan had the idea. Well, it's like, why are we writing our JavaScript into JavaScript files? Albeit it is convention, it is handy, but we've got script tags for a reason. And then we realized that you could also, the DOM itself, you could have a million onload handlers on your DOM elements. And the browser actually prefers that because it knows how to execute that, and it'll execute that in sequential order from top to bottom. By us coupling in the, just to go back into the source code to reiterate this, right? So it's like by us going top to bottom, right? We're not placing anything into the head, so there's nothing pre-blocking, right? All our script tags are asynchronous, so even themselves, their execution is done in a deferred manner, and they're all type modules as well. So there's like fancy ass stuff, right? And it can't get any more simpler than actually just taking your HTML, minifying it, spitting it down, instead of putting it into the JavaScript file again and then chunking that and then having the Webpack, sense mentality of bundling JavaScript files. Here I'm just printing it directly to the HTML. And this HTML document itself, the biggest ones I've seen, maybe a megabyte or two, are hundreds of thousands of lines long. This does not add any weight. If you were to add the weight of your JavaScript files and your HTML, this would actually work out to be a lot less because JavaScript files come with about 30 I think it's 6 kilobytes of added weight to them, whereas XElement only brings 98 bytes to the party. So it is 8,000 times, 800 times cheaper in the reflective weight that it's sending down the wire as well. So there's many things that we've done with this, it's like the conceptual implementation was really Jonathan. I have to say, that man is a genius, and what he's done is nothing wrong, but what it is like, we don't have renderers, we don't have anything. All we do is just give you access to JavaScript for that particular element, if you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
X element, it was, there was ways that we felt that this was the need. And you might be thinking, it's like, why is this the case then? I could just go back into React and I could do all this. So if things change, you know what, I don't need to do this whole, what we were doing on the side, this whole applying an observation, it'll observe it for me. I agree. But in a single page application, React will re-render your DOM 60 times, once every frame per second. The more DOM elements you have, the more elements it is is re-rendering, but it doesn't re-render the whole thing. It waits for changes, and then it just looks through its virtual DOM algorithm, sees what changes, diffs the two together, and then goes, right, okay, you've changed, we'll update you. But you'll find that this can still apply to a couple of thousand re-renders over time. Whereas with XElement, we're not really re-rendering anything. Anything that changes is a cause and effect kind of thing. The static stuff comes down the line. The user has to cause these effects to happen, cause these actions, and we're really picking up on those interactions. We're picking up on the clicks, the changes in the viewport, the changes in the screen size. We give you the entire litany of event handlers to listen to, just and apply themselves to using the app method here. And yeah, you're not really limited in that respect. It's like, for me to just do a click handler in React, I need to build a whole freaking application. Whereas here I could just apply a decorator and a click handler to it. The more deeper you go, the more you want. Yeah, of course we're going to be start working into the realms of JavaScript. But that is because we're now hitting, it's like XElement is really there to sprinkle JavaScript onto your HTML elements that you're printing statically in Astro, right? Whereas what we're doing, we're building an application using using a combination of static HTML and what could be considered to be a fancier, better version of jQuery. So it's a mixture of the two. And we're using all the cool latest JavaScript tricks like knowledge coalescing and all that stuff. Optional chaining methods. So developing an X element, you're using the latest JavaScript with maximum backwards compatibility as well. Okay, so we're back to work, right? So
Yeah.
we're now going to be observing any changes to this. So we're just basically going to be applying this, right? And we're getting the data. We're doing the same thing with the data as that. Um, so I'm just going to basically return the JSON here, right? So the response is the actual JSON. and then we go to response. That should be the same, right? And back in here, we're just going to basically do the exact same here, because we've done the fetch, we get the location, and then we're just going to basically pop a similar method, right, in the bottom here, where we're going to get the subregions. We're applying the data set to it. The data of that would be, yeah, not the store.country, right, would be the actual button. No, wait. Alright, so we're applying that, we're stringifying this. And we're just making a new namespace on the store, right? No, do I need the store? I don't need the store. I don't need the store, do I? No, I don't need the store. Am I grabbing subregions? That could be why. There's always something that I've done. There's never nothing else. It's always something that I've done. You get what I mean?
There we go. All right, so we've got codes and names for that subregion level.
Yep. And then all we're doing right now, that's that being applied to the data attribute, right?
Yes,
and
so all that. Yeah, we don't have anything in the UL right now. We have it attached to the UL.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And so I'm thinking this should be a div, right? And then this should be a UL in here.
Inside the div.
Yep. Right. And then yeah, we could get rid of this for the time being. Oh wait. Right. Save that. Come back here, refresh this. And we've got that again. Right. And that's the JS settings. We've got the attribute down here. Right, and that is there. Right, you can see that little pop-up on the screen. Right, yep. JS subregions, the hidden div. Now we've got the hidden div, right? Here, we're just passing this in. Right, and again, we just got the data set, so we're listening to the options over being true. Right, so we just listen to the attributes here, and now we're just basically going back up here, grabbing the list, getting the literal, mapping over the top of it and applying it to the list itself, right? And don't need that span, we got this. UL, and we plug that in there. Fingers crossed this should work. Restart the server. And there we go at the bottom.
There we go. So yep. And then those buttons don't need to be clickable because there's no level deep from that we need to go. We do just need to make sure that they are not added on to the previous. Oh, but you know what I want to test? If you click Scotland now, do we get a different list? We do.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we just need to make sure that visually we are separating those top four from the others. But yeah.
That's a different div, right? But yeah, totally. We're almost there.
Yep.
Yay! I mean, what we can do, we can put a HR in here, right?
Yep.
So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this horizontal rule underneath the div, right? So it falls into the scope of this, right? Yep, there we are. Right. So what we managed to get up to is here, right, where we get the subregions generated now, right? So we go submit country code, AU, and then we go to the Northern Territories, and we've got all the subregions in the Northern Territories, right? And just to correlate this back to the existing site, which is here, right? We went AU, right? So we've got the Northwest Territory, we've got one level, and then that is it. It doesn't go any deeper. So when we hit these buttons, all we're doing is updating the store.defaultLocation.
Yeah, so let's get that hooked up now then. And that'll be the last task for today.
Perfect, right? And then we hit that, right? So we've got a couple of store.defaultLocations to be fixing here, right? And then here is like we've got data, right? And we've got the full code as well, right? So happy days. We're just basically taking this data code and just updating that into the store, okay? So this data.code here is then becomes the store.dataLocation, right? So we go store.data, sorry, default location, wasn't it?
Yes.
Equals data.code, right? Copy this, and we plug this same line into this previous observation up here. We don't need you. Oh, let me plug you in here. So we don't need that there. Sorry. Now, data is not defined in the button. That'll be down here. Data.code. Ah, right, okay. Sorry, I plugged this into the wrong place. So we're only wanting this on the button, right? And here's our event listener, and here we're just basically going to go store.default location is equal to button.dataset.code. That's what I was looking for. Right, this year has not been set, right? Because I have no event listeners going on this literal, you see? Right, so that data code. And then so in here I'm just going to do an @observe again. We've really worked this @observe method, you know that? If you ever need anything, just observe it. And all we're doing is just applying the same kind of premise, right, to here, where we're just going to go grab me all the buttons, const all buttons. And because the thing is, this is all individually scoped, we could just reuse the same existing names, right? Because, you know, super lazy. And then we're just basically doing the exact same here. So we're just going to go query selector for each button, and then we're just applying this, and we're just going to get rid of the inner method details and just apply the click listener, right? So we get all the buttons, we go like that, happy days. We get rid of this fetch because we don't need the fetch anymore. We don't need subregions, don't need the response, we don't need that, we just need that.
Yep, we just need the store. Perfect.
And I need to pass in the store, right? So entry and then store, right? And then happy days. Default location getting popped in.
Yeah.
Right. Now that default location is there. Right. And now we got pure Tory land. And it's not bringing this.
Yeah, so
Right.
it's saying undefined at that point of the fetch call, where it should be saying a region. So somehow the store does have that default location, but our original, because FetchBirds wants a location, but I believe the button use my default location should have said use the stored default location for my location. I think that was the logic we were going with last time.
Yeah, so
Because I think once it hits fetch birds, birds just wants whatever's in location. So it is somewhere in the use my default button. It's in there that is going to take default location and say, okay, I can see the default location. I'm going to use that for location, and I'm going to give that value to fetch birds.
I think that should do it there. We've got that. There you go.
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. We got the Atlantic puffin. Oh, my favourite little bird, by the way. You seen this wee thing? Like, look at this wee mister. Right, and then so it's like we could update some of this stuff, right? So we set this, we get the default location, right? Actually, do you know what? Now I could get Glasgow up on this thing. Right, we got that, and then I could go use my default location,
Yeah,
and it's
default.
brought back the ring-necked duck.
Not as cute as a puffin, but
See that? Yeah, these wee crepid bastards. What do you call it? But no, it works.
yeah,
It works.
it
We're
works.
there.
Yeah.
Like, so we got Australia, right? So
Australia,
we could go to
so
like
pick
race, right? So we
yeah,
went to
exactly.
New South
New
Wales,
South Wales,
Plymouth, Linton's, fuck it, just anywhere, right? Ballina.
and then use my default
Default location,
location,
and
and a
then we got the
gray
birdie. We got the
naughty.
bird.
Excellent. We are successful.
Excellent. Yes, we fucking done it. We
So
have done it.
our streak continues. There is
We
there is nothing we have tried to recreate in XElement that we haven't been able to yet. That's the streak. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let's just finish off, right, with setting the default locations. You know, it's like
With displaying it, you mean?
yeah, displaying the location thingy, right? So it's like we've got that once, and I think we should just do that, keep that once instead of it having it twice. So it's here, right? We can update this, right? currently set to region set to GB, and we could change this to subregions, right? And we could currently change that to set to, right? So we go back to XR list. Ah, here we go. Set current, right? Okay, so this, right, is going to be. Wait, I don't need this. I could just set this as default location all the way.
Because right now we're using that store.country.code to make the
Mhm.
next API call. So those are two
Yes.
separate things. So we
Separate ones,
should,
yes.
so we can display the currently set to, but we may want to also at that point, once we have store.country.code, we can set the default location to that. Because country.code, that's the form of the object that comes back to us from typing in GB. Like if you type in GB, you get data that is of the form
I got you. Yeah, yeah. Here
country.code.
we
So
go. Here.
that's why then we're just displaying that.
Got you. And then that goes in here. Right. Okay. So let me just think about this.
So right there, you could also, just like we're saying store.country is that, we could do store.location is that as well. Sorry, default location. Yeah.
Yep. Right. And then that sets that at the top. Right. And then it should start feeding its way through. Aye. And then we go to the XR list. Here, and then we're just going to go store.default location. And that's all we're going to be bringing up through is currently set to store.default location. Right, and this should do the magic.
Okay. So now the trick will be refresh the page, type in GB, but then don't choose one of the other buttons. Go down and try to use my default location while we're only at that level. That's what we want to check. Yep, that worked.
Yep.
Perfect.
Wait. What I can do, right, is like, yeah, got it. Right, so that's ban. Finally. And now I got it. I'll explain in a second. Let me just do this because we're a bit short for time. So this dot text content is equal to store dot default location. Can I just do it through as an observation? Yes. Yes, I can. I was a bit preemptive in getting rid of those spans. Because what I'll do is I'll do span.dataset. Store.default location, so that sets this, right? Actually, do you know what? I'll give this an ID. Um, location display. Here we go. And that is span, happy days. This, yep, we go, and this is an at observe, right? And whenever this fires, we go currently set to this dot dataset dot location. And then what we're going to do is in our other observer, right? we're just going to basically grab the same thing. Const location display equals document dot query selector hashtag location display, and for here we've got that. Then we go text content, no, location display is dot text content is equal to sorry, dot location is equal to store dot default location. Move that up. Happy days. Happy days. Please work. So we got that far. Right, we just need to do this bottom bit now. Right. Now we've got Bedfordshire, and then we go to Bedfordshire. Yes.
Yep. We have nested XElements. We are able to use the results of multiple then nested fetch calls to hook into the notable bird displays we did before.
Exactly.
That's exciting.
It is.
Thank you so much for your time today.
No, thank you for your time and your patience and all your effort with us. Seriously, I really appreciate it.
Was again exciting, and I'll get the videos up at some point.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you very much, buddy. I really appreciate that, your effort in that. Right. Wish you a good week.
Yeah.
Wish you all the best, and you're awesome,
too.
right? Yeah, buddy.